shocking details of personal hygiene among ancient Vikings. Greetings! Today, we will talk about how the ancient Vikings monitored the external condition and health in general, and what was the first wedding night. It is true that instead of toilet paper, used ordinary moss. For what purpose the inhabitants of Scandinavia used urine in addition to using it in the washing process? Is it true that Vikings lived with whole families and kept livestock in one house? Be sure to watch the video to the very end to learn all the details of the life of this people. The concept of cleanliness and grooming in the northern inhabitants. Most likely you have heard more than once that the Vikings were not clean at all. At least this is the atmosphere conveyed by foreign movies. But this is only partly true. Let's deal with it in order. So, Vikings at least once a week washed in the so-called geothermal springs. The latter served as an alternative to classical baths. Natural pools located in Iceland, due to the many geysers in this area, were widely used. Such observance of personal hygiene is quite logical. As you understand, Scandinavia is a region where the air temperature is quite low. And if we take into account the geographical location of such lands, it is not surprising that the northern peoples tried to keep their bodies clean and warm. But few people know about the rite of uncleanliness, which took place after the loss of a Viking. In this case, the inhabitants of Scandinavia did not wash for quite a long time. This practice is connected with the Vikings' ideas about the afterlife, when it was necessary to put many things aside for later and see a man off on his last journey. The ritual did not take place quickly, but gradually. This is the only exception to the rule that washing was not allowed. The next thing to pay attention to is the concept of ancient Scandinavian peoples about grooming. Surprisingly, men along with women also used special grooming products. This was confirmed by archaeological excavations, as a result of which experts found one of the Vikings. Next to the body, there was a comb, a razor, as well as other personal items. Soon it was found out that Viking men carefully watched the vegetation on their face. An interesting fact, the presence of a lush beard indicated maturity and masculinity, while the Vikings without vegetation caused laughter and discontent among the inhabitants of Scandinavia. As for women, the Vikings considered long hair to be the standard of beauty. In addition to the concept of female beauty, it was regulated on quite legal grounds. For example, in one of the codes of ancient Scandinavian warriors, you can learn about the prohibition to cut the hair of female representatives of the female sex. And the law was adhered to by absolutely everyone, not only ordinary women, but also those who participated in battles. Strange things practiced by the Vikings. The question arises, if the northern peoples really kept their bodies clean and looked after their appearance, then what is the catch? And we didn't just in the very beginning talked about the Viking representations based on the description from the movies. Well, it's time to take apart the things that the average person can cause bewilderment. And of course, let's start with the elementary, bathing. Yes, the Vikings bathed every week, mostly on Saturdays. However, there is one thing. The inhabitants of Scandinavia could easily use the same water. And when the turn came to the next person, that person would take a bath that had not been cleaned after the previous one. Also, striking is the vat of water that was served for washing. It literally passed from one Viking to another in a circle. All would be nothing except that the water in the object was used the same. And in the process of washing, a man could blow his nose and pass all his secretions to another. As they say, it's not to be envied. There's a separate story about the toilet. Yes, Viking houses provided a place for natural needs. And although perfect sanitary facilities were not invented in those times, all the contents went down the drains into special pits. Among other things, the Vikings regularly went to the forest to take care of themselves. And now, pay attention. Moss was used as standard toilet paper because it wasn't very hard to get. It's a forest and it's full of such plants. Moss was also used in household toilets. The morning after the first wedding night, the husband would give his wife a gift. It was a reward for female chastity. Premarital relations were frowned upon among the Scandinavians. If the bride and her husband's friend accompanying her had to sleep in the same bed, a naked sword or a board was placed between them. To lose honor was shameful for a maiden. It is worth talking separately about the clothes worn by the ancient Scandinavian inhabitants. The most interesting thing here is the regularity of its wearing. Vikings could wear the same clothes both on the street and at home. Of course, after conquering campaigns, all armor and equipment were removed. But the fact is that brave warriors did not change their clothes at all, but could pile in their work uniforms. This is strange indeed. Washing things also surprises contemporaries. It turns out that a mixture made from urine was used as washing powder. Apparently, the Vikings borrowed such experience from the ancient Romans. And what to say, during the Middle Ages, urine was also actively used for similar purposes. But that's not all. It turns out that urine, as well as cow dung, was used to treat wounds. There is an understandable solution to this. In the Viking Age, medicine was not as developed as it is today. Therefore, it was necessary to use folk remedies. Plus, the Vikings brewed potions made from healing herbs. In general, they used all the gifts of nature, in which the northern peoples saw the benefits and effectiveness. It is also striking that the Vikings used table salt as an antidote. It was also used to treat wounds, especially severe ones. Yes, it hurt, but it was an effective folk remedy available to every Viking. Constant illnesses and ailments. At first, it may seem that the Vikings were not only powerful, but also very healthy people with strong immunity. Alas, this is not quite true. It turns out that the inhabitants of Scandinavia were constantly sick, and ailments occurred right at home. Why is that? It's quite simple. Have you ever heard of long Viking houses? It turns out that in such unusual buildings, people shared life not only with all family members, but also with pets and livestock. Yes, you heard me. Cramped, but no offense. Houses were built of wood, the roof was mostly covered with straw, and windows were not provided at all. Therefore, unsanitary conditions were certainly not observed in such conditions. The room was not ventilated, and the only opening was the chimney from the stove. It is not surprising that people were often sick, and it was impossible to avoid infections. Livestock were only brought here to keep them warm during the harsh winters and climate. They became the main source of infectious diseases. Also in such dwellings, up to several tens of meters in length, were slaves captured in battles. Vikings sold them to interested buyers for quite substantial sums of money.